conectarla, por favor.
Sí, está ahorita.
Gracias. Speaking demands a constant effort to make oneself intelligible to oneself and to others, to bear each other out, making oneself vulnerable, seeking both understanding and acknowledgement. It requires both faith and courage before the unpredictability of the erotic that lines all our utterances. It involves an effective investment, and as Cavell puts it, it involves risks, and if not costs, blood. To enter this path of the effective and subjective, we must learn to live with the sign of our finitude, with witnessing our obliviousness and even ignorance of our own desires, our blindness to our limitations, our chronically getting lost. But it is not enough for Cavell to say that we are lost. We need to determine how we are lost. How we get lost, he said in Caracas, is as important to us as it is to any theologian. Lost, it's perdition, it's damnation, and lost is where philosophy begins. Thinking philosophically becomes thus existential and passionate, even religious for Stanley. As he writes, the clumsiness of speech, the dumbness and duplicates and concealments of assertion, the bafflement of soul and body by their inarticulateness and their terror of articulateness, all these we need to acknowledge. These ontological facts are tasks of art as of existence. Second section, the adulterous divorce. Austin, of course, as Stanley points out, does not want us to look into the abyss. He wants to prevent us from getting close to the temptation to throw ourselves into it. Nothing could be farther from this, his dear teacher, unwilling to take on the issue of passion or expression in speech, than to identify philosophy's point with the tasks of art and existence, as Stanley did. Austin's resistance to walk that path is faithful to his tradition's prejudices. But as we said, his rescue of the performative dimension of speech had opened the floodgates for expression as a central feature of language that was to be accounted for. And so Cavell demands to have a criticism of the Enlightenment itself, some sense of what can be overdone or misdirected in these very goals, however admirable, of rationality. I'm interested in the misuses of rationality itself, as itself the cause of, also, modern grief and modern danger. As I already mentioned in his autobiography, Cavell had described the world as bent on denial, interest withdrawn to the point of chronic boredom, lost in lovelessness. And lovelessness is indeed an accurate characterization of the philosopher's condition in a world where the insistence on the pursuit of objective knowledge marginalizes the self and the affected dimension of experience. Emerson had written in his lecture on the Times in 1841, I quote, "A new disease has fallen on the life of man. Every age, like every human body, has its own distemper. Our torment is unbelief, the uncertainty as to what we ought to do, the distrust of the value of what we do, and the distrust that the necessity, which we all at last believe in, is fair and beneficent. Our religion assumes a form of rejection. Out of love of the true, we repudiate the false, and the religion is an abolishing criticism. We mistrust every step we take. We find it the worst thing about time, and we find it the worst thing about time that we now know not what to do with it. Uncertain, distrustful of our own desires and of the value of our actions, disbelieving in the goodness of necessity, we're intent on rejection, pretending to seek truth, and as Stanley adds in this new yet unapproachable America, refusing the rightful draw of our attraction, our capacity to receive the world. We become skeptics and bitter critics, unconcerned for and immune to why anything makes an impression on us, thus transforming the world from an interesting and self-affirming place to a place of chronic boredom. Cavell's chastisement of his analytic colleagues for having, quote, forgotten to praise or forgotten its value, is a direct allusion to the separation of knowledge from interest, from goodness, from praise. In other words, to an adulterous divorce that had made philosophical criticism a self-absorbed, defensive, and ruthless practice. The causes of this divorce are found in the classical empiricism upon which sits the modern conception of philosophy he is criticizing. Emerson himself noted in his powerful essay Experience that it detaches the impressions of perception from attraction or desire, amputating, in fact, knowledge from the body and its sensuous receptivity. Cavell's wish to reinvent the ground of philosophy with the concern for the conditions of possibility of the aesthetic is an attempt at remarriage that brings existential depth into epistemology. The philosopher's task becomes to discover the specific plight of mind and circumstance within which a human being gives voice to his condition, in Stanley's words. Whatever that condition be, whether skepticism, solipsism, narcissism, nihilism, or any other position you may have. It involves a discipline of both inner and outer listening and receptiveness, attention and care. Philosophy becomes an effort not to get anywhere else, but to find itself where it is. Section 3, remarriage. Speaking of his Hollywood comedies, Cavell wrote, "Our films may be understood as parables of a phase of the development of consciousness at which the struggle is for the reciprocity or equality of consciousness between a woman and a man, a study of the conditions under which this fight for recognition or demand of acknowledgement is a struggle for mutual freedom, especially of the views each holds of the other." Cavell's work, at least the way I'm looking at it, may be seen as a careful study of that demand of acknowledgement, not only as it plays out in our culture and society, but also and primarily within ourselves. It is a struggle for the reciprocity or equality of consciousness necessary to remain between the wild love of an eloquence we can never have, to recall how Cavell stated the issue in relation to his parents, and the glad unsayability of the utter expressiveness of music we can know. One that aims at not at resolving, but at becoming at peace with the intrinsic and irreducible disharmony of the limited and imperfect beings that we are. If his Hollywood comedies are examples of the production of a new idea of the human by the recreation of the woman, we could say that his writings produce a new idea of language or of thought or philosophy by the recreation of a philosophy receptive and faithful to desire. So the autobiographical becomes a most fruitful way to explore that tension between what we know already in the preordained vocabulary we speak, and a yet unformed desire in us, between conformity and self-reliance. It is by turning inward and trusting himself enough, despite the external criticism and censure, that Cavell will forge and exemplify in virtue of its faithfulness the kind of thinking and the mode of philosophical criticism he seeks. My interest, it could be said, lies in finding out what my beliefs mean and learning the particular ground they occupy. This is not the same as providing evidence for them. One could say it is a matter of making them evident. Making them evident in terms of themselves and not in terms of a standard of measurement or judgment. In making his beliefs evident rather than rendering evidence for them, Cavell's welcoming and hospitable autobiographical voice opens room for dialogue, for genuine interaction. Thinking is conceived then not as a power of knowledge, but as a capacity for acknowledgement, an avowal of vulnerability, of finitude and mortality, a labor of love, as Cavell writes in The Trials of Praise. Thinking becomes acceptance and appreciation, both modes of praise, which shows a readiness for change. And the genre of remarriage is characterized precisely as undertaking to show how the miracle of change may be brought about, and hence life together between a pair seeking divorce before become a marriage. And section 4, a criticism for the future. The traditional attempt to relate to the world primarily through the intellect is pictured in Wittgenstein's discussion of the search for an essence in Investigations 90, where, expressing the philosopher's state, we feel as if we had to penetrate phenomena in the fantasy of finding something hidden behind a thing that has to be brought to light or completely clarified to know it. But at some point, when at the end of all our efforts in this quest, we reach bedrock, and in Wittgenstein's memorable words, the spade is turned, he may be suggesting that what is needed, rather than to plunge forward towards the object, is to retreat from it, not attempting to possess it, but letting it rather approach us, turning our aggression willingly upon ourselves, which would require a discipline of both outer and inner listening, as well as receptiveness, attention, and care. Philosophy becomes an effort not to get anywhere else, but to find itself where it is. In this new position, penetration is no longer getting through the object in order to grasp its essence, but something more akin to circling it or incubating it until it germinates and catches on like a fever or an epidemic. It is also how Cavell sometimes described what he expected from his own writing, functioning as the finer weapon, the sharper point, the stronger arm, the more extended lunge, echoing Henry James' words speaking of criticism, staking its hopes on indirectness. Philosophy transforms thus its violent power of penetration into, quote, a conduct of gratitude, a specification or test of tribute, a reparation that makes praise again possible. Hence the importance of considering the grammar of emotion, of sharpening our sense for the logic of passionate utterances. There is a movement behind the conscious thoughts articulated in our words, a vitality that runs through our concepts that is silently active in our encounter with the world and with others, that can gradually generate clarity and understanding. It is with patience and disposition for mortification, in the sense in which Benjamin thought of the labor of brooding needed to bring a work to its idea, the confrontation with loss and absence and limitation, that the type of criticism Cavell is proposing for philosophy becomes possible. As he writes in the foreword of Must We Mean What We Say, I understand the presence of notable, surprising anticipations to suggest something more specific about the way or space within which I work, which I can put negatively as occurring within the knowledge that I never get things right, or let's rather say, see them through the first time, causing my efforts perpetually to leave things so that they can be and ask to be returned to. Put positively, it is the knowledge that philosophical ideas reveal their good only in stages, and it is not clear whether a later stage will seem to be going forward or turning around or stopping, learning to find oneself at a loss. Rather than possession and control, or what Emerson calls manipular efforts, the thrust required by Cavell's turn is stronger in another strength than that of penetration. In particular, it is effected, quote, in the ability to be patient, to suffer, to penetrate. What is needed is a cultivation of something like John Keats' negative capability, which he defines as a capacity of being in uncertainties, mysteries, doubts, without any irritable reaching after fact and reason. Or in the words with which James describes the kind of future criticism he envisioned, the capacity to be differently, more strongly, more finely struck. Indeed, as he writes, this fineness it is that communicates the virus of suggestion, anything more than the minimum of which spoils the operation. Wittgenstein's proposal of family resemblances and seeing aspects moves towards a conception of thinking diametrically opposed to the philosophical attitude expressed by the attempt to penetrate phenomena to find their essences. The ability to praise is connected to the openness to the other, and the inability to praise with the inability to imaginatively link things rather than merely conceptually or in reference to some model or of ideal understand them. But only with that ability can you bring philosophy to the point where what is at issue is not so much truth or exactness of something as much as the truthfulness and originality of what we have before us. My acceptance is the way I respond to them, and not everyone is capable of response or willing for it. A truthful statement is one we must acknowledge or fail or refuse to acknowledge. What is required is a willingness, the courage to become vulnerable, to acknowledge the worth of the other, not on the basis of similarity, but on the basis of its essence, understood not as substance, but rather as a process of different repetitions. An important part of what this remarriage involves is a reevaluation of the mode of knowing that Wittgenstein characterizes as seeing aspects, and Cavell always refers to as reading, especially with regard to physiognomy and the body. The issues of the unsayable, silence, the body, and seeing are all related to praise insofar as they involve a resistance to the unbearability of what he calls the pain of silence that surrounds our words and actions. It involves being able to confront what is unknown and what this what this is in the newly emerging other lies beyond what we can comprehend in ourselves. It may, for example, and I quote Stanley here, it may, for example, be of overriding importance to me to test the attunement of our intuitions, our agreements and judgment. Since I believe that philosophy can reach no further than these agreements, I'm apt to be tempted to test them. And I might write about film. For the reality of film, the reality that film pursues is precisely that which lives in the gaps and emptinesses and silences. This is Stanley again. The further continuous reality in which the words we need are not synchronous with the occasions of their need, or in which their occasion flees them. I have in mind not the various ways dialogue can stand at an angle to the life that produces it, nor the times in which the occasion, if past, when you can say what you did not think to say, nor the times when the occasion for speech is blocked by inappropriateness or fear, or the vessels of speech are pitched by grief or joy. I have rather in mind the pulsing air of incommunicability which may nudge the edge of any experience and placement, the curve of fingers that a mouth, the sudden rise of the body's frame as it is caught by the color and scent of flowers, laughing all afternoon mostly about nothing, the fire gone but somewhere now which starts from here. Spools of history that have unwound only to me now, occasions which will not reach words for me now, and if not now, never. I am not asking for more stream of consciousness. Stream of consciousness does not show the absence of words as the time of action unwinds. It floats the time of action in order to give space for the words. I am asking for the ground of consciousness upon which I cannot but move. Conveying the unsayable by showing experience beyond the reach of words, by freeing the motion of the body for its own lucidity, the ontological fact that actions move within a dark and shifting circle of intention and consequence, that their limits are our own, that the individual significance of an act, like that of a word, arises in its being this one rather than every other that might have been said or done here and now, that their fate, like the fate of words, is to be taken out of our control. This is a natural vision of film. But still, we have the need for total intelligibility, though it must be tempered by this new kind of knowledge. The wish for total intelligibility, Stanley writes, is a terrible one. It means that we're willing to reveal ourselves through the self's betrayal of itself. Love is always the betrayal of love, if it is honest. It is why the path of self-knowledge is so ugly, and so rarely taken, whatever its reputed beauties. The knowledge of self as it is always takes place in the betrayal of the self as it was. That is a form of self-revelation until the self is wholly one. Thank you very much. Okay, well, I guess we are open for a discussion, conversation. Yes, Stephen.
I'm going to formulate a question, but I wanted to break the ice of silence by being the first person to thank both you and Gordon for these extraordinary papers that have put so much before us, and it's just extraordinarily rich. So I just want to thank you. Byron has raised a hand. I'll come back most likely with a question or comment for you both, but I didn't want, as the typical role of host would have been to thank the previous person for their talk and to fill up that, to be the breaker of ice. And since the host was himself the speaker, I was thinking, well, is Gordon going to leap in and play host here? So I took it upon myself.
It's
And now
always
I'm returning the host role to you, Victor, to call on those participants who have raised.
Thank you very much, Stephen. It's always nice to be able to count on you and have you around for these particular instances. I love it that we're such a small group of people that have been here all along, so we can have a more intimate discussion. So Byron, Byron.
Yeah. So my question is going to be pretty prosaic in comparison with Stephen's expression of praise, but I'm going to lower my hand. So one point of connection, obviously, between your two papers, which I both loved, is the last chapter of The World Viewed and the question of synchronization. So this, even though I formulated this question in reading Gordon's paper, it is meant to be for both of you. So Gordon sketches this trajectory in Cavell's thought where Thomson Clark enters in with regard to Austin. I wanted to ask about another figure in this trajectory that leads to the last chapter of The World Viewed, and that has to do with Michael Fried, theatricality, and all of that. I mean, obviously the questions about Fried and literalness and theatricality come up when it comes to, just when it comes up in the context of the Mel Bachner piece and its obvious literalness. But what I'm thinking of is something like the so in the last chapter of the World Viewed, Cavell has this view that synchronized sound makes explicit that saying and meaning cannot be perfectly synchronized. This must be something closer to like a spiritual achievement, which is what Gordon is sketching in the last part of his paper, and I think is at every stage of Victor's paper, this spiritual achievement, which allows for the poetry of sound film. But what contrasts with that spiritual achievement is two different things. One is what he calls performance, again linking these issues to questions of theatricality, and then the other is again this picture of saying and meaning as being automatically synchronized. So the idea that somehow, I mean, at first it wouldn't be obvious why these two should be linked or why they should be both on the other side of this opposition, this automatic linking of saying and meaning and notions of performance and theatricality. It's just that linking is central to art and object to it, to Fried's art and object to it. So I take it that that's in the background for what's going on here in the last chapter of The World Viewed. With complications, though, of course, because Fried also, when it comes to film in art and object, Fried says that film, it was available to film. It is available to film to automatically escape these questions about the synchronization of meaning and saying, which he puts in terms of its automatically escaping the problems of modernism. And then, of course, Cavell moderates that view by saying that it's not exactly in the nature or it's not exactly automatically available to film to do that. It's rather film was delayed in having these questions about the synchronization of meaning and saying imposed on it, not just by the invention of sound film, but by its entering into this modernist predicament that he's responding to in the later chapters of The World Viewed. So anyway, sorry if this was kind of a reductionistic take on what your papers are up to, having to do with the poetry of sound film and the poetry of this coming out of the spiritual achievement that is meant to contrast with the perfect or automatic synchronization of saying and meaning. But I specifically wanted to ask about that very interesting linking between notions of performance and theatricality and the picture of an automatic synchronization of saying and meaning, because it's a kind of a very difficult linking together that Fried brings out. It's, I think, central to art and object to it, and is in the background for the last chapter of The World Viewed.
I'll just start. and then Victor can reply in the way he wants. I don't really have a reply. One so one thing that so Byron, one thing that I'm not really tuned to is the automatic linking of saying and meaning in Freed's essay. I get all like hot under the collar about why I love and he doesn't love Robert Morris, and so apart from footnotes where he says he hates surrealism and the Nazis, there are some of the details I don't always get.
Well, can I say one brief thing? Because there's
oh yeah, that might help.
There's a point that I forgot to make, which is that when it comes, the point about the synchronization of meaning and saying in the context of Freed and art and object, what I had in mind there was his opposition to notions of surefire effects and things like that. That was,
I see.
I mean, I think, because based on conversations you and I have had in the past about these things, I think we share a certain kind of sensibility about some of his evaluative critical judgments in there. But I specifically had in mind the notion of surefire effects in his terms of criticism, and how that is an interesting but surprising way of elaborating on notions of theatricality and performance. And so I was just pointing out that that's central to what Cavell is doing in the last chapter of The World Viewed.
Yes. So with this notion of performance, it seems to me it's linked to acting without performance. Obviously, is defeating theatrical in some obvious way, not performing seems to me to be playing a role in letting the language as a whole speak through me. And one of the things that's not automatic in the way I think somewhere, maybe it's in the last chapter of World Viewed, does Cavell say that one of the places where language in talkies seems to go smoothly is in banter, in sort of repartee, that there's certain kinds of jokiness that seems to move quickly and we don't notice the asynchronization. And there's a so I'm choking on saying that what it seems to be going through Cavell on this releasing performance and letting action happen or letting the language speak reminds me of a kind of modification or modulation of stuff that is apparent in the Tractatus, where the structure of things shows itself when we stop trying to make words say this or that and just let language speak for itself in its tautologies, contradictions, things like that. So that's what I've got from the defeating performance and letting expression happen. I think in the literalness of, I mean, one of the things, this is not probably my own failing, but one of the things that I struggle with in Freed is, and I would love to make it my own, is this use of the word literal, because I do sort of care about what people think of as the literal meanings of words and what they might be. And I know that they play a role in the Endgame essay in Must Mean What He Say. But I've never really made it my own that they're called literal. I think in part, maybe I guess it's hard for me to know what the literal is in words, and so that's an issue. So it could be that I should have more to say, but I don't have a lot to say with this Bachner and the. It is true that what I like about Bachner's The Paper Defeating the Words is not unlike the theatricality of a Robert Morris. It seems to defeat its specific location and space because it seems to be wider. So So it's not also not unrelated to, I think it's just the way Cavell describes it in the brief passing through why I hate minimalist art in the Excursus on Modern Painting. He says that the experiences are landscaped rather than something, rather than coming together in a tight way. Like, I think he thinks that in a Frank Stella, things come together kind of gaboom, and you get something about them, but you don't get anything with literalist art. It just kind of the experiences get landscaped rather than precipitated or something like that. I think just in terms of evaluation, I kind of like the landscaped, and that may be a way of saying what I wanted the Bachner to do. I'm right. I should stop and let Victor take over, but I'm right now kind of obsessed with the scene and the said. And so I'm particularly gripped by the fact that Bachner's measurement pieces seem to me to recharge the scene, and more than just the to recharge by asynchronizing the scene and the said, and that the word paintings later in his career seem to recharge the said by a similar kind of asynchronization. Bachner says somewhere, painting all the words in various colors, he relieves the words of the duty of meaning. So that just may be my own particular obsession right now, but that's where now I'll pass it over to Victor.
Well, I'm gonna move on. I might come back to that question. The only thing that occurs to me when I'm hearing this is there's one particularity that I learned from that Bernstein essay as well, and that is that the article that Stanley writes as performative and passionate utterances had a previous title that was performance and passionate utterances, which I think is very interesting to think about in terms of this issue. But I want to give, we have a list of people that want to talk, and that's Bill Rothman first, Bill Day, then next, Nancy Youssef, and Stephen Athelt, in that order.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, good. Okay. I was having trouble with my sound. First, I just wanted to say that I really appreciated both papers. Especially the level that they both aspired to and achieved. And I think it's because they were praising Stanley's work at that level that it seemed inevitable and natural that there were so many quotes from Stanley that, really profound and great and difficult, challenging passages. That anyway, I have just a simple question for you, Victor. When your maybe title, part of it is staging praise. Why staging? I mean, and there seem like two reasons. One having to do with performance. That praise is it a performance? It can be staged. And the other is that word stage from one of the quotes that ideas in philosophy reveal their good by stages or in stages. Were you thinking of both of those?
I was not thinking about both, but I was wondering at the expression staging praise, and I related it to this same issue of performance and meaning. I mean, where the words can be used without that performance, letting those words speak for themselves. Staging praise in terms of this connection you've made between the stages through which philosophical ideas come to their maturity makes me think about the title staging praise as having to do with precisely moving from that praise with which which may be staged in the sense that it may be vain praise, or it may be part of narcissism, that it may be solipsism. I mean, these trials of praise that Stanley talks about. So that staging praise may be one way of dealing with the ways in which praise can be false, and praise can be no longer part of performance, but rather part of a certain receptiveness.
Yeah, and the concept of praise was essential in Stanley's work from the beginning, but his thinking about it deepened to the point that he's able to write the essays in that late book. Anyway, just a small thought. I really would like to have a copy of both of these papers, because it's a lot to think about.
Sure, thanks. And I just this deepening of prayer. Yeah, this is the one thing that struck me when I first read that comment, that the reproach he makes in that introduction to Must We Mean What We Say, about their being unable to praise and to recognize the value of praise. That was at one level. That's what struck me at the end. That when I went back to that was a very superficial level in a way, but that it acquires a certain depth when he starts talking about praise in the way in which he does at the end in that book, and further on in his autobiography. Yeah. Bill Day.
I was next in line in the chat, but I think Nancy, if she would like to ask her question next, I think she had her hand up before I was next in the chat.
It's just that you talked on the chat. Yeah, sure. Nancy. Yeah, can't hear you. You're muted.
All right. Am I unmuted now? Okay,
Yeah.
thanks. That's nice of you. You know, everybody's going to have a chance to talk, so that's fine. Yeah, I also thought these were really extraordinary papers, very Cavelian, and yet somehow profoundly different in their emphases, I think, in their starting points. Victor, I would love to have a longer conversation with you about praise and criticism as a sort of conduct of gratitude. I come to this group from literature, so really we could have a very long conversation about the divorce of knowledge and interest and the lack of praise in current criticism, but that's another issue. But my question is actually for Gordon. I appreciated the confession at the beginning of the paper about a sort of initial resistance to Cavell's ordinary, and I appreciated the sort of effort to be working, trying to work your way towards it. And then I confessed myself that I had some resistances along the way in listening to your paper. And I couldn't quite, I'm ready to be like instructed and disagreed with, because I may not have understood actually where certain emphases were ironized and where they were sincere. So my difficulty came in the framing of the initial question as of the ordinary as somehow like fundamentally a matter of the relation between words and things. That seemed central to the paper, and therefore to kind of the promise of a new relation to the ordinary is terms like magic came up, transfiguration, somehow a healing of this rift that is usually filled in with metaphysical invention, right? Is how you put it. So my difficulty, and that's fine. It seemed a little like a romantic promise, the promise of transfiguration. My problem is that, does this skew things rather towards phenomenology, rather more towards phenomenology? And what's wrong with that? That being skewed towards phenomenology would seem to kind of keep the discussion on subjectivity, on the experience of the subject, sort of keep it there, you know, rather keep the emphasis there. You know, so at the end of the paper, there's a move towards, I guess, what I would call the relational, right, where you invoke form of life. But so much of the paper was in that realm of the phenomenological, if you like. And I had in mind like the challenge is like something from Wittgenstein. There's a section in Philosophical Investigations that I hunted out at 436, where the interlocutors are responding to the question of like, how does a sentence manage to represent? And one would like to retort, it all goes by so quickly and I'd like to see it as it were more fully. And at 436, Wittgenstein says, here it's easy to get into that dead end in philosophizing, where one believes that the difficulty of the problem consists in our having to describe phenomena that evade our grasp, the present experience that slips quickly by, or something akin, where we find ordinary language too crude, and it looks as if we were dealing not with the phenomena of everyday conversation, but with ones that are evanescent, and in their coming to be and passing away tend to produce those others. So, so I wonder, do I have that right? I mean, is the phenomenological more central to your case, in fact, central to your account? And if it is, why? You know, or why is it primary?
Thank you, Nancy. I think that's exactly the kind of place that I find myself. Although the sense in which, and that passage 436 is one in which I've struggled with a lot because I've wanted to oppose it. So that looks like, so there I am known by you. But the thing is that, what shall I say? Where I ended up, I thought was very non-phenomenological in the sense that phenomenology, I mean, what the hell is phenomenology, right? It's a 100-year-old tradition or more. So like, I can't talk about it quickly, but like just grab a Merleau-Ponty moment. One thing is that in sort of middle Merleau-Ponty in the phenomenology of perception, there's an awful lot of trying to figure out what the active body, what kind of world the active body reveals. And in analytic philosophy is sometimes invoked for having recognized that objects seem to have a distance at which they come into view. I think there's a passage where he says, when you're in an art gallery, everyone seems to everyone seems to find the level. It's almost like a carpenter's tool. They're the right distance away from things. And the right distance, and when you're the right distance away from things, things come into view. I think there's a little story, I think Gombrich or somebody told a story about like going up to a painting and coming back up so close that he couldn't see what it was, and he wanted to watch it turn into like a potato at the, when it turned into a potato, and he said, oh my God, I just gave up, I couldn't do it. But like that, so one aspect of the phenomenological thing is the right distance to things. And that's exactly what I'm trying to oppose. And one of the reasons, and one way of saying I'm trying to oppose it is I'm trying to oppose it by adding more performance. I don't want less, I want more. I want to add enough performance that the ordinary is fragmented into shards of light. So like, I do care about experiences, I don't care about the subject. Maybe I should. How can you care about the shards of light if you don't care about the subject? Yeah, so that is absolutely, it's absolutely where I kind of want to be. I'm not sure I want to describe it in terms of phenomenology. So for instance, I used to think that I used to think that we should try to develop meanings from our experiences, like a full-on phenomenological thing. And now I think the reason Merleau-Ponty ended up talking about flesh is because the seen and the said don't match. And the only way to make them match is with Jesus Christ or the flesh. And so that's not something that I want to do now. I'd rather, yes, kind of experiential, but no subject. I don't know if that doesn't make sense to a certain kind of phenomenologist. When Deleuze is praising aspects of Foucault like this, he says, Foucault's greatest discovery is to kill off phenomenology and replace it with epistemology, but like, who knows what he meant? But anyway, but I don't know if that doesn't quite answer your question, but I do feel you have exactly nailed me. And I've been trying to figure out a way not to be a phenomenologist and to be in that same neighborhood. You want to say something more, Nancy?
You're muted. You're muted.
Oh,
you're muted. Nancy, you're muted. Okay. She can't unmute. Oh. How is that possible?
Now I can.
Okay.
Right.
It was giving me a message saying that the host was controlling the muting. No, Gordon, I mean that makes sense to me what you're saying, and in my on my side of the disciplinary boundary, there's a lot of object-oriented ontology, and there's a lot of experience without subjects and phenomenology without subjects. So I was wondering if that was if that was sort of in the background.
Yes.
I guess then, and we'll move on, but then then the next question would be, okay, well, where is the Cavelian element? Because it's, I wouldn't say that Cavell is subject-centered at all, but he's got two people talking. There's always at least two people talking, right? And so the shimmer and the shimmer and the leaves on the trees and all that doesn't really matter, or it matters insofar as like two people are talking about it, or you want to talk to somebody else about it. So there's the relational dimension, I guess, is what, for me, what's primary, rather than the shimmer. But
yeah, right. So I'm really not sure how. I'm not sure whether that does lead me away from Cavell. I think it does. One of the things that, but this is, I'll just be quick. I'm not really fond of the human, and I think we really should treat people like things, but not like things rather than humans. I think we should, address ourselves to things closely enough so that we have affection for them. And one of the things that bothers me about perfectionism is in the essay that Stanley writes on experience that the Emerson essay presents a full-on metaphysics of the essence which can't actually get out, the being, and that plays no role in Cavell, because you would never like name something like that. And yet perfectionism is kind of like that. Perfectionism has like the unknown, which is showing itself more, and it's never fully here. It can always change, and it will change. And I think of that as a lingering grain of the 19th century that, we all read different books. I was sort of weaned from it by The Order of Things, or Words and Things, naturally, my obsession. Okay, but that's.
Bill.
Wow. So, boy, that was wise of me to have Nancy go first. But before I get to that, so I've got it's likewise a question that's tied on something that Gordon's pointing out. But I want to say, echoing what everyone else has said, but in particular with Victor, I just want to confess that in reading your paper and in hearing your paper and in reading your other papers, I get the sense I begin, I'm not sure where you're going. I'm a little unclear about how these things hold together. And then there's like this impression that comes over me that seems right in the way that these things hang together. And it's a kind of magic. It's a kind of artistic magic that you do. So I just wanted to thank you for that. And I likewise with Bill want to see a copy of the paper as read and maybe see how that's done. So Gordon, you're going to see that what you're talking about, especially when you talk about the musicality of the ordinary or a musical ordinary in Stanley, is something that I'll be talking about next time. But the differences that I guess the question I have, the differences I'm feeling are similar to Nancy's. It seems that you want to do something with Cavell that does bring him closer to you. And I think that the way that that's being done is not actually, it strikes me at least as not accurate to Cavell. So the thought hinges on Cavell's interest in the Wittgenstein remark that understanding a word is really more like understanding a stretch of music than we tend to think. I take that to be a remark about Wittgensteinian grammar and so Cavellian grammar. And so that's to say that when you want to make the musical, the Cavellian musical ordinary something else, there is something else in Cavell, but I don't think that that's what the analog to understanding music is pointing to. There might be something else in musical experience that I think it's pointing to. But this remark that he makes a couple times in these late essays on music, and you cite one of them, where he says it's the thing about music is that it's a way of getting understanding without meaning, right? It's that idea that I take saying that Wittgensteinian grammar is like understanding a piece of music is meant to point to, right? That there is something, as you say, there's something mistaken about the idea of understanding another person as mapping their words onto the things they refer to. And once you've done the mapping, you've understood what's being said. No, it's not like that. It is, in fact, something like understanding music. But again, it seems to me that that's what grammar wants to do. And the place where this maybe came out for me was when, I think this is on page 17 of the paper as we were given it, where you say, let me see if I can find that. Here it is. This is where you're bringing Cavell closer to you, right? You say, it's clear that Cavell at least takes these experiences seriously. And for Cavell, I suspect this experiential aspect of our linguistic inhabitation is what makes musical understanding such a good guide to linguistic understanding. And I'm just remembering those passages of Cavell in Music That's Composed and Elsewhere, where, like Wittgenstein, he would say it's not the case that understanding requires or is identified with a particular experience associated with a particular sentence or associated with a particular stretch of music, right? Understanding the music is not having some experience. It is, I think, more rightly captured by thinking of understanding without meaning. And I'm intrigued, I'm trying to myself sort out what the difference between those is, and your paper has brought it forth to me. But so I guess I don't know what the question is other than to say is it strikes me that you're bringing Cavell closer to you and you're some way leaving Cavell behind in doing that. And I'm wondering if you have a response to that.
Yeah, and Nancy, as you said, Nancy said something similar. What you almost like said, where are the people? And I think you've also put your finger on something, because if the appeal to if using musical understanding as a guide to sentential understanding is meant simply to feature that there are no meaning objects, that's completely different from what I did when the passage you said. So like that is right. And I do want to move in the direction of those experiences. So I was thinking, I don't know if this is relevant, but I was thinking, there's like there's a kind of a dispute, a disagreement about grammar between Stephen Alfeld and Stephen Mulhall. And I began to think that this might be one way in which it shows itself, in that the thinking of grammar as it were sort of an isolable thing, that might be the target that's Mulhall's line, and that's the target of and Stephen, I'm gonna mangle it, but like the idea that it's not an isolable schematism, it is nothing more than our agreement, our attunements, our agreement in judgments. That seems to me to say that there is a sense in which, well, I don't know, it's not a sense, who knows what it says, but I'd like to take that as the kind of turbulence of impressions, experiences can organize themselves into grammar, which somebody might abstract in the same way you might say, stop thinking about the sheep, we're just doing arithmetic. There's 4 and 4 and they make 8. I don't care about the wool. It seems to me that that's it seems it's not irrelevant to your issue about grammar versus experience. And that's not really much. It's not an answer, but that is relevant to what you said, isn't it?
Well, I think what I'm speaking to is actually closer to Stephen Affeldt than to Stephen Mulhall in understanding grammar. I guess, and I think you're right. Nancy, I think, brought it out, that the notion of understanding is understanding a person. It's not understanding a sentence. And it seems to me understanding a piece of music is like that. But
I actually, now both of your questions come together now for me, because you could say, if this is would be a way of putting both of your questions to me, is like, I've left out the sense in which Stanley says, when you're what's wrong with the skeptic if you can't understand them, not their words, that they can't make a claim. And that is, I guess that is kind of left out. And it's maybe no wonder that my paper really was trying desperately to bring Cavell's writing together with what I want to do with Deleuze's interpretation of Foucault, which is, obscure. So I think maybe I just have to say mea culpa to that. I am.
Yeah, that's a confession. Stephen.
I'm going to lower my hand so that I don't see myself waving at myself the whole time. So excellent, such great conversation to this point, and whatever fragile, tenuous sense I had that I actually had a question that I might be able to express intelligibly has become more and more attenuated. So I'm just going to say a few things and we'll see if anything happens from it. One thing, just picking up where we just were, I said to Bill Day the other day, we were having an in-person encounter, and I shared with Bill what I described as the greatest gift that my psychoanalyst gave me. So I did strict Freudian psychoanalysis for 5.5 years, 5 days a week, except in August when my analyst, like all good analysts, was in Wellfleet, Massachusetts. And I kept waiting for my analyst to understand me. And I came to realize that the greatest gift that she gave me was that she didn't understand me. And she would always say, I would say something and I would say, like, what do you think? Or something. And she would say, I don't know. And I found that extremely frustrating because I wanted to be comprehended. But I also knew, and she knew better than I, that I would have hated to be comprehended. So I'm raising this, I guess, because partly because it's sort of where we were with understanding, and I'm wondering, is that what we want from one another? Understanding. And what does that mean when we talk about wanting to be understood, or is my relation to another person in Cavelian or Wittgensteinian terms or just my own terms, that I want to understand them? I don't think so. And so this is, so now something back to something for Gordon and Victor. So I'm also, I'll apologize in advance for what's likely. There's something I'm trying to write right now that I'm obsessed by, and so everything is getting shoved into one of those boxes, which is precisely what I'm trying to write right now, is about not shoving everything into pre-existing boxes. But so I'm going to do the thing I'm trying to avoid. It seems to me, listening to both of your papers, which were so beautifully delivered, and in their own, you both have a way of delivering something which is very idiosyncratic and extremely powerful. But I was thinking, well, you both seem concerned with the ways in which language, words, we don't know, destroy the world, kill the world, make it boring. Gordon's opening image of the tree that gets nailed with the sign, there you are. And so you both seem to be starting with a kind of concern about comprehension, or about the death of experience at the hands of understanding, or something like that. And both seem to be encouraging us to think about practices of the ordinary as ways of allowing words to say themselves, allowing actions to be, but so a kind of project of resuscitation. But in Gordon, I have the impression that the path is a path of attention that fragments, so that breaks understanding. And in Victor, I have the impression of a kind of longing for integrity. So both emerging from a concern with a deadness to experience, but where in Gordon, I get the sense, forgive me again for this being so vague, that Gordon's sense is that the problem is a kind of comprehension, a kind of integrity, and that what we need to seek is something that fragments, that allows shards of illumination. Whereas in Victor, I have a sense of a more romantic kind of longing for a richer kind of integrity, that the problem is a lack of integrity. So I don't know if that's accurate. I had a question for both of you. I mean, one is sort of, have I got the tune right? I had a question for Gordon about what's the difference? Is there a difference between what you're talking about as a practice of the ordinary that's moving closer, like moving sort of through the word to the thing, that allows I mean, this, you have these nice images of fragments and light. It's a kind of letting, I don't know, experience happen. So sorry, I'm trying to think about that and how that is or isn't like what Emerson means by letting, by not using language willfully, where Emerson says our willful actions and acquisitions are but roving, right there, or talking about trying to rely on our privacy of power, like trying to use words to mean what you mean, as opposed to letting words say themselves. The latter seems more congenial, or seems closer to Cavell than, it seems, at any rate, it's a place where there might be, where Cavell himself, where Cavell shows us in Wittgenstein or something, resources for going beyond the ordinary, where if the ordinary is understood as something like the routine, the habitual. Sorry, it's all just, it's a mess of thought, but I'm trying to think about the resources that Wittgenstein provides us for escaping our inevitable kind of familiarity, right? So when the whirl of organisms stabilized by grammar gets too damn stable, then it's no longer a whirl, right? Then you just have commerce, right? Then you've got a bunch of people engaged in commerce. This is, what does the investigations begin with? Sorry, I'm going to shut up soon. We've got Augustine talking about the curse of inheriting language, that the passage that Wittgenstein quotes doesn't include this, But what Augustine says is, thus I entered more deeply into the stormy seas of society or something, right? So it's a blessing and a curse. You get the gift of language, but you also get the curse of now being part of this cast out of Eden group. And then what does Wittgenstein do? First thing you get are people who have to earn their bread by the sweat of their brow, right? They go shopping, they've got to buy their food, and they've got to build a shelter, right? So they're thrown out of the Edenic paradise into the world of commerce and labor. That seems like the problem, that when language becomes a vehicle of commerce, the whirl of organism quits whirling and the world goes dead and we all understand each other. And so how do we get back to, what I'm trying to think about is, what is Wittgenstein offering us as a way of getting back to the whirl, back to something like, like, I love it when you say, Gordon, I'm not interested in people, I'm interested in things. Treat people like things, people get understood, things get admired, looked at, appreciated, delighted in, or kicked around. I don't know. Okay. Stopping with that, I didn't time myself. Way too damn long, and vague. Sorry.
Well,
You're smiling, Victor.
Because I found your comments to be really. I feel like my paper is also still kind of just a sort of constellation is going around. So that what you've said makes me want to concentrate on a couple of issues, and one has to do with the integrity that you're talking about, and it does make me understand a little bit more what my distance is from Gordon, as well as my closeness, because there's it's an interesting thing. The integrity, for me, it's important to talk about the body, which I never got to.
Yeah.
I mean, that's why I start saying, what they're doing is they're bringing it more towards the body. And I think that the integrity has to do with that, precisely the kind of knowledge, the kind of awareness, the kind of experience that the body brings to words. And also the notion of words as being extensions of the body, not as external to the body. So I would, I can go along with the subject is not important, as long as there's a body, and I don't know if the body has to necessarily be considered a subject in that sense. But that's the other reason why I think that receptivity and the ability to hold the opposites without trying to bring them together. I mean, it's not bringing the opposites together. How is it? Does he puts it? Not making them agree, but rather just bringing them together so that they hold that tension. And that's where I think that brooding, and this is the whole Benjaminian thing, the brooding, the sort of just, staying with the trouble, waiting for that so that eventually words start to emanate their meaning beyond what it is that, conventions and, our stable meanings signify, and more in terms of that movement that is always there, which is the world of organism never stopping. Yeah. So in a way, these silences, I mean, that unbearable silence, I think Stanley talks about the difficulty of the silence that in movies is kind of covered up sometimes by music. I think that learning to live with those silences as part of the comprehending is what I'm looking for as, let's say, the condition of praise, and that the difficulty with that and how we react to it constitutes what the perils and trials of praise may be. I mean, everything you said, there's so much more to talk about. But I mean, those
just one quick little thing, and then I want to hear Gordon. But yeah, so part of my sense of the integrity side of things for you definitely has to do with the body. um, and I have to, you know, I have to think about what that means. But I think something that works against a kind of problematic integrity for you is that it's always the eroticized, right? So the erotic is always, the body is always ecstatic, right? So we're not going to get to a kind of, well, there, that's
Right.
you because it's tied to your body because,
Right.
and so for you the erotic, I think, is keeping the ecstatic in play.
And I think that that's precisely what constitutes the subject matter of the theory of passionate utterances.
Yeah. But I guess I get the sense from you sometimes that you and I actually share a kind of theological, there's a kind of theological something that's always driving us towards some kind of desire for union or something where everything's going to be good.
Yeah.
Gordon,
And Gordon, please.
definitely not theological.
No.
Well, I on whether or not you've got the tune, I think you do have, at least you have my tune, that it's about disintegration, not integrity. So that is true. And what Bill and Nancy also said about this being not really full on Cavelian, that's also true. I mean, I tell Victor all the time, whenever I on Cavell, I feel like I'm betraying him, and he goes, "That's just you." But no, I feel like I'm betraying him because I am. And so, but now on what hurt me a little was saying that I'm against words and language, because although the ginkgo story was about words being violent, which I mean I liked how the ginkgo resisted, but whatever. But although it was about words being violent, I would like to be able to say of words what I was saying of the ginkgo, by which I mean to say something like this. Why is the ginkgo destroyed by words? It's destroyed by words because the words that destroy it are themselves, if this was religion, it would be fallen, or mechanical, or conformist, or in the language of Gertrude Stein, just being used. She says, at one point she says in the Geographical History, "Oh, do not say that words have a use," because when we're and so just as I think that I don't, this isn't quite parallel, so it bothers me a bit. I think the things can resist their linguistic characterization. How does that work on the language side? I'd love to be able to say the words resist their grammar if you let them run. If I don't know if it made it to the one that was shared with you, but like Stein also says, I just love the successions of words, like they're the coolest thing. It seems a little bit uncontrolled from a grammatical point of view. There are too many periods too soon after too few words. But I really would like this to be, unfortunately, I don't think it's equal and opposite, but like I would like to do with language what I did with the ginkgo, that we think of words as having uses, as having grammar. Now this is a Stein distinction. It's actually not a Stein distinction. She's not like keen on distinctions, but it's almost in the essay of hers called Arthur A. Grammar. She invents a character. She says She says there's grammar in retrospect, and grammar in retrospect is what Walter Piston said about harmony. It's grammar in retrospect.
Mhm.
She also says there's grammar in resistance. Now I'm making it sound much too like philosophy to actually be Stein, but like a grammar in resistance is not running from performance. Like you run from performance if performance is making things routine. I would like to add performance to make it not routine. And one of I almost said this in answer to Nancy's question about 436, was that it seems to me like this is I hope this is not rude, but like Wittgenstein doesn't want the phenomenological, the experiential. And if you think of that as like damp or moist, what he dreams of is using language in our lives in such a way that it's dehydrated. So all of a sudden you can just feel fine. This is what I don't know. That may be being rude to Wittgenstein, but that's how I'm thinking of it. I'm thinking of what he dreams of. It's like we're in trouble because something's messing up about the cat on the mat and the propositions, and we just have to come back, follow the rough ground, back off the ice, and it will be okay. And I think, but only for a moment, right? But in those moments, and anyway, I don't know. I'm recycling old ideas, but that's it.
Can I ask just a really quick question? So, do you think that Wittgenstein, and then do you think that Wittgenstein, as Cavell reads him, wants to? I guess what I'm trying to think about is Wittgenstein actually like a fan of roughness? Like that's where you want to get back to roughness, because what you want is to be lost. Because Wittgenstein, I'm saying what Wittgenstein wants to show us is the place where anything happens is when you're lost. So yes, of course, you want to be able to walk, but the last thing you want is to get found, because then there's nothing happening, right? So I guess I'm thinking what Wittgenstein wants. This is why he says the real discovery is the one that gives me peace. But then he says, instead, I demonstrate a method by examples. And the list of examples is never over, right? Because you don't want peace. That's the end of things. Then there's nothing happening, right? So is that Wittgenstein? Is that, I mean, I don't know if that's dehydrated, because I'm trying to read Wittgenstein as trying to show us the inevitability and necessity of routine, of the world of organisms stabilized by grammar. Love that expression. But also that what you want to do is keep yourself engaged in the life of your language and your world of organism, your form of life, in such a way that it continues to sustain you, I don't think he would say fragment, but to blossom, or to show itself in interesting ways.
Yeah, well, so this, my paper began with this confession that I always end up finding out that I end up agreeing when I thought I was disagreeing. And I'm not sure what to do with this. The words philosophy succeeds by succeeding, because that is what this is. That's at least one place where this exactly arrives. And that succeeding is way closer to Stein's successions of words are so cool, baby, than it is to, I know the right name of 7 different shades of blue, yeah. But I don't know how to characterize Wittgenstein there. But for right now, as I keep on saying, my obsessions are about the two words in the order of things. Are about, you know, they're like Magritte issues, they're Bachner issues, that those, and I think of the space between the two as where thinking happens. That when there is no space between the two, you've got what Heidegger would call calculative rationality. And it's just that rather than, I mean, this is too Heidegger, but rather than listening to the call of the Bavarian woods, I just don't think you should listen, or whatever listening, another kind of listening. I think that the thinking happens when you are, as in Stephen's words for today, lost. Like when you just don't know that, it's like and that is, I mean, now this is turning into Foucault, but it's like criticism is either criticism from without, like, you know, the stop sign's broken, fix it, or it's Kantian criticism where we secure the thing better by doing our little transcendental thing, or it's being criticism that Foucault wanted, which how to think something new. And you think something new not by getting the things and the words together in the appropriate way, but by busting them open somehow.
Well, this is the point at which we would go out for lunch here in Lima and have a really nice after lunch talk. But since we are all in our respective spaces, we will have to depart. Nancy, you had a couple questions that you wrote in the chat. Do you just want to? No. I'll pass them on to.
That's fine. I think actually Gordon sort of again, like, confessed, right, that there is like historically, temporally, a kind of avant-garde aesthetic that you know, that sort of the habitus of your ordinary are kind of crucial to getting it in motion. So that's all. Anyway, it was an awesome discussion today.
It was wonderful. I wish I wasn't confessing so much and betraying so much, but it was really fun.
Yeah. Thank you very much for coming. It was really wonderful to see
Thank
you.
you both.
Bye-bye.
Don't forget, in 2 weeks, we're meeting for the last time, and it'll be Bill and David who will be talking about, closing the colloquium. Good to see you. Have a good weekend.
Thank you all so
Bye all.
much.
Thank you very much.